The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone corridors of Windsor Castle as Prince William stood before the ornate mirror in his private chambers. Today was supposed to be one of the most important days in British royal history, yet something felt profoundly different about this coronation. The weight of the crown that would soon rest upon his head seemed lighter somehow, overshadowed by a much heavier burden that had been growing in his heart for months. Catherine watched her husband from across the room, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and understanding that only comes from years of shared experiences and unspoken communication. She had witnessed the transformation in William over the past year, ever since they had received the devastating news about young Timothy Matthews, an 8-year-old boy from Manchester who had captured the prince's heart during a hospital visit. Timothy had been born with a rare genetic condition that required constant medical attention and had left him wheelchair-bound since birth. Despite his challenges, the boy possessed an infectious smile and an unwavering spirit that had touched everyone he met. During William's visit to the children's hospital, Timothy had asked the prince if he would ever get to see a real coronation. William had promised the boy that he would make sure Timothy had the best seat in the house when the time came. That promise had been made 18 months ago. Timothy had passed away just 3 weeks before the coronation, leaving behind heartbroken parents and a community that had rallied around the brave little boy. The news had reached William during a state dinner, and those who witnessed his reaction said they had never seen the future king so visibly shaken. Standing in his chambers now, William fingered the small blue ribbon that he had kept in his pocket since Timothy's funeral. The ribbon had been part of a friendship bracelet that Timothy had made for him during one of their several meetings. The boy had insisted that William wear it during important moments, claiming it would bring good luck and remind him to always be kind, even when wearing fancy clothes. The royal dressing team had arrived an hour earlier with the traditional coronation regalia. The crimson velvet robe with ermine trim lay carefully arranged on the mahogany table, while the golden ceremonial sword and other symbols of monarchy gleamed under the chandelier's light. Everything had been planned meticulously for months, following protocols that had been established centuries ago. But as William looked at these symbols of power and tradition, he found himself thinking not about the weight of the crown or the expectations of a nation, but about a little boy who would never see another sunrise. Timothy's mother had told him at the funeral that her son's greatest wish had been to meet someone who could make the world a kinder place. The words had echoed in William's mind ever since. Catherine approached slowly, her coronation gown rustling softly against the marble floor. She placed her hand gently on her husband's shoulder and spoke in the quiet voice she reserved for their most private moments. "You've been thinking about Timothy again, haven't you?" William nodded, unable to trust his voice for a moment. When he finally spoke, his words came out barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking about what he said to me the last time I saw him. He told me that fancy clothes don't make someone important, but what they do while wearing those clothes does." An 8-year-old boy, Catherine, an 8-year-old boy understood something that took me 39 years to truly comprehend. The prince walked to the window that overlooked the crowds already gathering outside. Thousands of people had traveled from around the world to witness this historic moment. Television crews from dozens of countries were positioned strategically, ready to broadcast every detail of the ceremony to millions of viewers. The pageantry and grandeur would be spectacular, as befitting a royal coronation. Yet William found himself questioning everything. What message was he sending to the world by draping himself in symbols of wealth and privilege while so many children like Timothy fought daily battles that no child should ever have to face? How could he stand before his future subjects wearing clothes that cost more than most people earn in a year while promising to serve all people equally? His private secretary knocked softly on the door, reminding him that the formal dressing ceremony would begin soon. The Archbishop of Canterbury was already at the castle, along with numerous other dignitaries who would play roles in the ancient ritual. Every minute of the day had been choreographed to perfection, and Any deviation from the established plan would create logistical nightmares and potentially diplomatic incidents. But as William continued to stare out at the gathering crowds, he noticed something that made his heart skip. Near the front of the assembled masses, he spotted a group of children in wheelchairs, accompanied by what appeared to be hospital staff. These children had clearly been given special positioning to view the procession, and their faces were bright with excitement and anticipation. One little girl, who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, was holding a small sign that read for Timothy in shaky, childlike handwriting. Even from his window high above, William could see that she was wearing a blue ribbon around her wrist, identical to the one Timothy had made for him. The sight hit him like a physical blow. In that moment, William realized that this coronation wasn't just about him or even about the monarchy. It was about every child like Timothy who had ever felt forgotten by the world, every person who had ever struggled to find their place in a society that often seemed to value appearance over substance, wealth over kindness. He turned from a window to find Catherine watching him with eyes that seemed to understand exactly what he was thinking. She had always possessed an uncanny ability to read his thoughts, but never more so than in this moment when he felt torn between duty and desire, between tradition and truth. "What if we did something different today?" he asked her, his voice stronger now, filled with a determination that hadn't been there moments before. "What if instead of simply following the prescribed path, we used this moment to say something meaningful, something that Timothy would have wanted to hear?" Catherine's response was a gentle smile that told him she had been hoping he would reach this conclusion on his own. "What did you have in mind?" she asked, though something in her tone suggested she already knew. William walked back to the table where his coronation regalia waited. He looked at each piece with new eyes, seeing not just symbols of authority, but opportunities for communication. Every choice he made today would be scrutinized by millions of people, analyzed by historians, and remembered for generations. The question was, what message did he want that legacy to carry? He thought about Timothy's parents, who had been invited to attend the coronation in their son's memory. He thought about the children outside wearing blue ribbons and holding signs. He thought about every person who had ever felt invisible or forgotten in a world that often seemed to celebrate only power and privilege. "I want to honor Timothy," he said finally, his voice clear and resolute. "But more than that, I want to honor what he represented. I want this coronation to be about service, not status, about humility, not hierarchy, about the kind of kingdom that a boy like Timothy would want to be part of." Catherine nodded, understanding immediately what such a decision would mean. It would require tremendous courage to deviate from centuries of tradition on such a significant day. It would spark controversy, criticism, and probably political complications that would last for months. But it would also send a message that sometimes doing the right thing matters more than doing the expected thing. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Prince William made a decision that would change not just his coronation day, but the very nature of what it means to serve as a modern monarch. The choice he was about to make would indeed move millions, though perhaps not in the way that anyone, including William himself, could have anticipated. The transformation was about to begin, and it would start with something as simple as a blue ribbon and the memory of a boy who had taught a future king that true royalty comes not from what you wear, but from how you choose to wear your heart. The royal dressing chamber fell silent as Prince William announced his unprecedented decision to his bewildered staff. Sir Geoffrey Whitmore, the palace's chief protocol officer, nearly dropped his ceremonial clipboard when William calmly explained that he would not be wearing the traditional coronation robes that had been prepared with painstaking attention to detail over the past 6 months. "Your Royal Highness," Sir Geoffrey stammered, his face growing pale beneath his perfectly groomed mustache. "The coronation regalia has been blessed by the Archbishop, approved by Parliament, and represents centuries of unbroken tradition. Surely you cannot be serious about making changes at this late hour?" William's response was delivered with the quiet authority that comes from absolute certainty. I have never been more serious about anything in my life, Jeffrey. Today, I want to dress as someone who serves the people, not someone who rules over them. The confusion in the room was palpable. Catherine watched as the various members of the royal household exchanged worried glances, clearly uncertain how to proceed when faced with such an unexpected deviation from protocol. The team of royal dressers, who had been preparing for this moment for months, stood frozen with their hands full of priceless ceremonial garments. William walked to his personal wardrobe and withdrew a simple navy blue suit, the same one he had worn at Timothy's funeral 3 weeks earlier. The fabric was well made, but unremarkable, the kind of suit that any professional man might wear to an important meeting or formal event. There were no gold threads, no ceremonial decorations, no symbols of royal authority woven into its design. "This is what I want to wear for the ceremony," he said, laying the suit carefully on his bed. Along with this, he pulled out the small blue ribbon that Timothy had made for him, holding it up so that everyone in the room could see it clearly. The reaction was immediate and intense. Sir Geoffrey's face went from pale to bright red as he struggled to find words that might dissuade the future king from what he clearly viewed as a catastrophic mistake. "Sir, you must understand the implications of such a choice. The ceremony will be broadcast to over 2 billion people worldwide. Every detail will be analyzed and discussed for decades to come. The symbolism of royal dress has profound meaning for the stability of the monarchy itself." But William had anticipated these objections. Over the past few weeks, since Timothy's death, he had thought deeply about the nature of modern monarchy and its relevance to ordinary people's lives. He had read extensively about public service, about leadership that inspires rather than intimidates, about the difference between power that commands and authority that earns respect. "Geoffrey," William said patiently, "I understand your concerns, but I need you to understand mine as well. When I met Timothy Matthews, he asked me a question that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. He wanted to know why kings and queens wore such fancy clothes when there were children in hospitals who didn't even have proper pajamas to wear at night." The prince paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "At the time, I gave him some explanation about tradition and ceremony, but the truth is his question exposed something that I had been feeling for years but hadn't had the courage to acknowledge. How can we ask people to believe that we truly understand their struggles if we surround ourselves with symbols that emphasize how different we are from them?" Catherine stepped forward, her presence lending support to her husband's position. "William isn't abandoning tradition," she explained to the increasingly agitated staff. "He's trying to create a new tradition, one that reflects the values that our future subjects actually hold dear: compassion, humility, service to others. These are the qualities that people respect in their leaders today." Lady Margaret Pemberton, the palace's senior advisor on public relations, cleared her throat nervously. "Your Royal Highness, with all due respect, the public expects a certain level of pageantry from royal occasions. The tourism value alone of a traditional coronation is estimated to be worth hundreds of millions of pounds to the British economy. People travel from around the world to witness the grandeur and spectacle of royal ceremony." William nodded thoughtfully. "And they will still witness something spectacular, Margaret. But instead of spectacle based on wealth and privilege, they'll witness something much rarer and more powerful: authenticity. They'll see a leader who is willing to be vulnerable, to show that service is more important than status." As he spoke, William began to change into the navy suit, his movements deliberate and confident despite the obvious distress of his staff. The suit fit him perfectly, having been tailored months earlier for Timothy's funeral. As he adjusted the tie, he thought about that heartbreaking day when he had stood beside a small coffin, listening to stories about a boy who had never let his circumstances diminish his joy or his kindness. The blue ribbon Timothy had made was simple in its construction, woven from inexpensive materials that the boy had purchased with his own pocket money. But as William tied it carefully around his wrist, hidden beneath the cuff of his suit jacket where only he would know it was there, it felt more significant than any crown jewel he had ever worn. Sir Geoffrey made one last desperate attempt to change the prince's mind. "Your Royal Highness, perhaps we could reach a compromise? You could wear the traditional robe for the ceremony itself, and change into more modest attire for the reception afterward. Or perhaps wear simplified regalia that maintains the dignity of the office while acknowledging your concerns about accessibility." William considered this suggestion for a moment, understanding that his staff was genuinely trying to protect both him and the institution he would soon lead. But as he looked at himself in the mirror, dressed in the same clothes he had worn to honor a child's memory, he felt more like the king he wanted to become than he ever had while draped in ermine and gold. "I appreciate your concern, Geoffrey, and I know this isn't easy for any of you," William said kindly. "But sometimes the most important changes require the most courage to implement. Today isn't just my coronation. It's the beginning of a new chapter for the monarchy. I want that chapter to start with honesty about who we are and who we want to become." He turned to address the entire room, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "Every person in this kingdom matters. Every child in every hospital, every family struggling to make ends meet, every individual who has ever felt forgotten by those in power. Today, I want them to see that their king understands that true nobility comes from service, not from ceremony." Catherine approached her husband and gently straightened his tie, a simple gesture that somehow managed to convey both her pride in his decision and her support for whatever consequences might follow. "The children outside will understand," she said softly. Timothy would have understood. As if summoned by her words, there was a soft knock at the chamber door. A young page entered, carrying a message from the palace communications team. The note informed them that word of the prince's sartorial choice had somehow leaked to the media, and early reports were already appearing on social media platforms around the world. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Traditional monarchists expressed shock and concern about the breach of protocol, while others praised the prince's decision as a refreshing sign of humility and modern thinking. Hashtags supporting both perspectives began trending within minutes, and news organizations scrambled to adjust their prepared commentary about the ceremony. But perhaps the most telling response came from an unexpected source. The group of children from the hospital, the ones William had spotted from his window wearing blue ribbons in Timothy's memory, had somehow learned about his decision. According to the message, they had begun cheering and crying with joy, telling anyone who would listen that the prince is wearing Timothy's colors too. William read this report with tears in his eyes, feeling more certain than ever that he had made the right choice. As he prepared to leave his chambers and begin the journey to Westminster Abbey, he thought about Timothy one more time, imagining the boy's reaction to seeing a king crowned while wearing clothes that looked like something Timothy's own father might wear to work. The blue ribbon remained hidden beneath his cuff, a private reminder of a public promise to rule with the kind of heart that would have made a brave little boy proud. The coronation that was about to unfold would indeed be unlike any in British history, and it would move millions of people in ways that traditional pageantry never could. As William walked toward his destiny, dressed not in the robes of ancient kings, but in the simple clothes of a servant leader, he carried with him the hopes of every person who had ever dared to believe that those in power might actually care about those who had none. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey had witnessed countless coronations throughout the centuries, but none quite like this one. As Prince William's motorcade approached the historic cathedral, the crowds lining the streets began to buzz with confusion and excitement. Word had spread through social media and news outlets about the new king's unprecedented decision to forego traditional coronation regalia, and the public reaction was as diverse as the British population itself. Inside the Abbey, 2,000 guests representing royalty, government officials, and dignitaries from around the world had taken their seats, each expecting to witness a ceremony steeped in centuries-old tradition. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, had spent weeks preparing for what he assumed would be a conventional service, complete with ancient rituals and symbolic vestments that had been part of British coronations since medieval times. When William stepped out of his vehicle, the crowd's reaction was immediate and powerful. Some people gasped in surprise, others began to weep, and many started applauding with an enthusiasm that seemed to come from deep within their hearts. The simple navy suit he wore stood in stark contrast to the elaborate military uniforms worn by other members of the royal family. Yet somehow he appeared more regal than ever before. Sarah Chun, a nurse from Timothy's hospital who had been invited to attend the ceremony in the boy's honor, found herself overwhelmed with emotion as she watched William walk up the Abbey steps. "He looks like someone who would actually understand what it's like to work double shifts to pay the bills," she whispered to her companion. "For the first time in my life, I feel like we're crowning someone who might actually represent people like me." Inside the Abbey, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation and uncertainty. Cameras from around the world focused on every detail as William processed down the aisle, and television commentators struggled to find appropriate words to describe what they were witnessing. Traditional royal watchers seemed at a loss, while others praised the bold choice as exactly what the monarchy needed to remain relevant in the modern world. As William took his place before the Archbishop, the weight of his decision became clear to everyone present. The golden throne of St. Edward, the coronation chair that had been used for over 700 years, seemed to dwarf the simply dressed figure who stood before it. Yet rather than appearing diminished by the grandeur surrounding him, William somehow seemed to transform the entire space through his presence. The Archbishop had initially expressed private concerns about the deviation from protocol, but as he looked into William's eyes during the ceremony, he later said he saw something that convinced him they were witnessing something profound and necessary. The young king's sincerity was unmistakable, and his commitment to serving rather than being served radiated from every gesture and word. When a moment came for William to be presented to the people for their recognition and acceptance, the response was unlike anything anyone could remember from previous coronations. Instead of the polite, ceremonial acknowledgement that typically greeted such moments, the Abbey erupted in what could only be described as genuine celebration. People were crying, cheering, and many were holding up small blue ribbons that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Dr. Elizabeth Matthews, Timothy's mother, sat in a place of honor near the front of the Abbey, her husband beside her clutching a photograph of their son. When William turned toward the congregation during a particularly moving moment in the ceremony, he made brief eye contact with them, and the slight nod he gave in their direction spoke volumes about why this day was unfolding as it was. The moment that perhaps moved the most people came during the anointing ceremony, one of the most sacred and ancient parts of the coronation ritual. As the Archbishop applied the holy oil to William's hands, forehead, and breast, the new king was observed to be wearing the blue ribbon that Timothy had made for him, now visible on his wrist as he extended his hands to receive the blessing. Television cameras captured the moment in stunning detail, and within minutes, images of the simple woven ribbon were circulating around the world. Social media exploded with stories about Timothy and the friendship he had shared with the prince. Parents posted photos of their own children making blue ribbons. Hospitals shared videos of young patients cheering for their ribbon king, and celebrities began changing their profile pictures to include blue ribbon symbols. Perhaps most remarkably, the ceremony seemed to take on a life of its own as it progressed. Other members of the royal family, initially uncertain about William's choice, began to embrace the spirit of what he was trying to accomplish. Several senior royals were observed wiping away tears during the service, and Prince Harry, despite long-standing tensions within the family, was seen beaming with pride at his brother's courage. The international reaction was equally powerful and immediate. President Emmanuel Macron of France tweeted within hours that he had witnessed a coronation for the ages, showing that true leadership requires the courage to be authentic. Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany called it a masterclass in modern monarchy, while leaders from across the Commonwealth expressed admiration for William's willingness to honor both tradition and innovation. But Perhaps the most significant reactions came from ordinary people around the world who felt represented and heard by William's choices. Children's hospitals reported that young patients were asking to meet the king who dresses like daddy, while charities focused on serving disadvantaged communities saw unprecedented spikes in volunteer applications and donations. The ceremony's most powerful moment came during William's coronation oath, when he departed from the traditional script to add his own personal promises to the British people. After completing the required constitutional pledges, he paused and spoke directly to the congregation and the television audience. "I promise to remember that this crown belongs not to me, but to every person who calls this kingdom home. I promise to serve with humility, to lead with compassion, and to never forget that true nobility is measured not by the grandeur of our clothes, but by the goodness of our actions. I wear this simple suit today to remind myself and all who serve alongside me that we are public servants first and everything else second." His voice broke slightly as he continued, "I make this promise in memory of Timothy Matthews, a boy who taught me that the most important question a leader can ask is not 'how can I be served?' but 'how can I serve?' Today, I commit to building a kingdom worthy of every child like Timothy, where every person matters and every life has value." The response to these words was overwhelming. The Archbishop later described having to pause the ceremony for several minutes as the congregation erupted in applause and emotional responses that seemed to come from the very depths of people's souls. Even hardened political reporters were observed wiping away tears as they filed their stories. Outside the abbey, the crowds that had gathered to watch the ceremony on large screens set up throughout London began spontaneously singing hymns and patriotic songs. But perhaps more remarkably, they began sharing stories about their own experiences with loss, hope, and service. The blue ribbons that many wore became conversation starters, leading to connections between strangers who discovered shared values and common dreams for their country's future. As the ceremony neared its conclusion and William prepared to receive the actual crown, the weight of what had transpired began to settle over everyone present. This was not just a coronation. It was a transformation, not just of a prince into a king, but of an entire institution into something more accessible, more human, and more relevant to the lives of ordinary people. The crown that was placed on William's head was the same one worn by monarchs for generations, but somehow it seemed different now, lighter perhaps, as if its true weight came not from gold and jewels, but from the responsibility to serve that William had so publicly and movingly embraced. As King William I took his first steps wearing the crown, dressed in his simple navy suit with Timothy's blue ribbon visible on his wrist, millions of people around the world felt that they were witnessing not just the crowning of a new monarch, but the birth of a new kind of monarchy altogether. 6 months after the coronation that changed everything, King William I sat in his private study at Kensington Palace, reading through hundreds of letters that continued to arrive daily from people around the world. The simple navy suit he had worn on Coronation Day hung carefully preserved in a specially designed case, not as a museum piece, but as a reminder of the promises he had made on that extraordinary morning when he chose service over spectacle. The immediate aftermath of the coronation had been intense and sometimes challenging. Traditional monarchists had initially criticized his choice, arguing that he had diminished the dignity of the crown by abandoning centuries of established protocol. Several senior courtiers had privately expressed concern that his actions might set a dangerous precedent that could undermine the authority of the monarchy itself. But as the weeks passed, something remarkable began to happen. The blue ribbon that Timothy Matthews had made for his prince became a symbol that transcended royal ceremony and entered the fabric of British society in ways no one could have anticipated. Schools across the United Kingdom began incorporating Timothy's ribbon into their curricula as a way to teach children about kindness, service, and the importance of treating every person with dignity regardless of their circumstances. The Timothy Matthews Foundation, established by William and Catherine, just 1 month after the coronation, had already raised over £50 million for children's hospitals and rare disease research. But more importantly, it had sparked a nationwide conversation about how society treats its most vulnerable members and what true leadership looks like in the 21st century. Dr. Elizabeth Matthews visited the king regularly, not as subjects visiting their monarch, but as friends continuing a relationship that had begun through their shared love for a remarkable little boy. During one such visit, she shared with William a letter that Timothy had written but never sent, discovered among his belongings after his death. The letter was addressed simply to "my friend the prince," and contained Timothy's hopes for the kind of king William might become. "I hope when you become king," the letter read in Timothy's careful handwriting, "you remember that being important isn't about wearing fancy clothes or living in a palace. It's about making other people feel important too, especially the ones that other people forget about. If you can do that, you'll be the best king ever, and I'll be proud that we were friends." Reading those words, William had wept openly, understanding more clearly than ever why his decision on Coronation Day had felt so inevitable and so right. Timothy's wisdom, captured in the innocent words of a child, had become the guiding principle of his reign and the foundation upon which he was building a new vision for the monarchy. The international impact of the coronation continued to resonate across the globe. Other royal families began examining their own traditions and considering ways to modernize their approaches to public service. The Westminster effect, as historians were already calling it, was inspiring leaders in democratic nations as well, with several heads of state choosing to adopt more modest approaches to state ceremonies and official functions. Perhaps most remarkably, the simple act of wearing an ordinary suit to an extraordinary ceremony had somehow made the British monarchy more popular and respected internationally than it had been in decades. Public opinion polls consistently showed that William's approval ratings had reached historic highs, not because people were impressed by his wealth or status, but because they trusted his authenticity and believed in his genuine commitment to serving others. Children's hospitals around the world had begun requesting visits from local officials who would come dressed not in formal regalia, but in simple, approachable clothing that wouldn't intimidate young patients. The Timothy Protocol, as this practice became known, was spreading organically as healthcare workers and administrators recognized how much more meaningful these interactions became when the focus remained on the children rather than on the importance of the visitors. Catherine had embraced her role as queen with the same spirit of accessible service that had driven William's coronation choice. Together, they had transformed royal engagements from formal photo opportunities into genuine conversations with ordinary people about the challenges and joys of daily life. Their children were being raised with an understanding that their privilege came with the responsibility to use their positions to lift others up, not to set themselves apart. The blue ribbon that started it all remained a constant presence in William's life. He wore it during every official engagement, though often hidden beneath formal clothing as it had been on Coronation Day. But during his most important moments, meeting with world leaders, addressing Parliament, or visiting communities in crisis, he would ensure that Timothy's gift was visible, a quiet reminder of the values that guided his decisions, and the friend who had helped him understand what true kingship meant. One particularly moving example of the ribbon's ongoing significance occurred during William's first state visit as king, when he met with the president of Uganda to discuss healthcare initiatives in developing nations. During their formal dinner, William quietly showed the president the blue ribbon and told him Timothy's story. By the end of the evening, both leaders had committed to a joint initiative providing medical equipment and training to children's hospitals across Africa, funded not through government bureaucracy, but through a personal foundation that both men would support from their private resources. The ripple effects of that one conversation, sparked by a simple ribbon and the memory of a brave little boy, eventually resulted in improved health care for thousands of children across multiple countries. It demonstrated how authentic relationships, built on shared values rather than political necessity, could accomplish more than traditional diplomacy ever could. As William reflected on these developments during quiet moments in his study, he often found himself imagining conversations with Timothy about the changes taking place. He pictured the boy's excitement at hearing about other children being helped, his delight at seeing blue ribbons worn by people around the world, and his satisfaction at knowing that his simple gift had contributed to making the world a kinder place. The letters William continued to receive told stories that would have made Timothy proud. Parents wrote about children asking to do volunteer work because that's what the Ribbon King does. Teachers reported students treating classmates with disabilities with newfound respect and kindness. Hospital workers shared accounts of young patients facing their own health challenges with courage, inspired by Timothy's story and William's example. One letter that particularly moved William came from a 10-year-old girl named Emma, who was battling the same rare condition that had taken Timothy's life. She wrote, "Dear King William, I heard about your friend Timothy, and I wanted you to know that because of him, I'm not scared anymore. If Timothy could be brave and kind even when he was sick, then I can be brave and kind too. I made my own blue ribbon, and I wear it every day to remember that being sick doesn't mean you can't still help other people feel better." These letters reinforced William's conviction that the choice he had made on Coronation Day was not just about one ceremony or even one reign, but about establishing a new understanding of what it means to serve in a position of authority and influence. The simple act of choosing humility over hierarchy had created space for countless other acts of compassion and service to flourish. As the first anniversary of his coronation approached, William announced that he would mark the occasion not with traditional pageantry, but with a day of service. He invited citizens across the United Kingdom to spend the day volunteering in their communities, wearing blue ribbons to honor Timothy's memory, and to symbolize their commitment to treating every person with dignity and respect. The response was overwhelming. Millions of people participated, from school children reading to elderly residents in care homes to corporate executives serving meals at homeless shelters. The day became an annual tradition that spread beyond Britain's borders, with other nations adopting similar observances focused on service rather than celebration. Standing once again before the mirror in his chambers on the morning of that first anniversary, William dressed in the same navy suit he had worn for his coronation, now cleaned and pressed, but otherwise unchanged. The blue ribbon around his wrist felt as meaningful as it had a year earlier, perhaps more so, as he understood more fully how one small act of remembrance could grow into a movement that touched millions of lives. As he prepared to spend the day visiting hospitals, schools, and community centers alongside thousands of volunteers across his kingdom, William whispered a quiet thank you to Timothy, wherever the boy's spirit might be. The friendship that had begun in a hospital room and been sealed with a simple bracelet had transformed not just a coronation, but an entire understanding of what it means to lead with love rather than authority, to serve with humility rather than demand service from others. The legacy born from that friendship continued to grow, touching lives in ways that no traditional crown or ceremonial robe ever could. Timothy Matthews, a little boy who had never lived to see his 9th birthday, had taught a king how to rule with his heart, and in doing so, had helped create a more compassionate world for every child who came after him. In the end, the coronation outfit that moved millions wasn't remarkable for its cost or its craftsmanship, but for what it represented. The possibility that those in power might choose to use that power not to elevate themselves, but to lift up others. It was a lesson learned from a child and lived out by a king, proving that the most profound changes often begin with the simplest acts of love and remembrance.